Hello and welcome to the Geek Battle Gaming YouTube channel. Today we are going to be looking at the 400 Mini, which is a miniaturized version of the Atari 400. Now it's not just an Atari 400. This little bad boy, look how small and cute it is, can also play games from the Atari 5200 console, the Atari 800 home computer, and a couple of other things as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. Bosh!
The humanoid must not escape.
The Atari 400 Mini is here, with 25 games built in and the ability to expand the library with hundreds more games. This is the ultimate nostalgia fest for everyone who wants some of Atari's 8-bit computer goodness. In today's discussion, we'll talk about the built-in games, adding your own library of classics, which controllers work with the Mini, and much, much more. So, as always on one of these Atari reviews, I will ask the question, have you played Atari today? Well, let's get ready and deep dive in.
Got the humanoid, got the intruder.
I love Atari hardware, and I love Atari games. That's why I'm so excited to get my hands on the Atari 400 Mini. I reviewed a bunch of Atari hardware on the channel recently, including the Atari 2600 Plus and the Atari Gamestation Pro, and perhaps I'm most excited to get this newest console. My very first video game playing device was the Atari 800, and whilst this new mini console may not have the exact same look as the machine I grew up with, it is effectively an Atari 800 as well. And well, it has a wide range of compatibility. We'll go over all of the systems you can add games from. With 25 games built in and the ability to add games from a host of classic Atari systems, this is a fantastic device not only from a nostalgia perspective, but also from a game preservation perspective. The console also allows you to save games using save states, rewind gameplay progress, and comes with a funky new take on the Atari Classic joystick. But more on all of that later. The list of built-in games is as follows. You get Airball, Asteroids, Basketball, Battlezone, Berzerk, Boulder Dash, Bristles, Capture the Flag, Centipede, Crystal Castles, Electra Guide, if I pronounced that correctly, Encounter, Flip and Flop, Henry's House, Hoover, or Hover Bother, I believe. Bother, like I ain't bothered, you know, my American friends won't get that. Anyway, it comes with Lee, Mule, Millipede, Miner 2049er, Missile Command, O'Reilly's Mine, Star Raiders 2, the 7 Cities of Gold, Wavy Navy, Super Breakout, and Yoomp. Or Yomp. I don't know how that's pronounced either. Anyway, I love the work that RetroGames have done with their past releases of the C64 Mini, the C64 Maxi, the VIC-20, the A500 Mini, and I'm looking forward to what else they have. Now, I've got a bunch of these, and I'm glad to see their great work continue, with them now branching out beyond Commodore and into the world of Atari. With several more projects announced, at the time of writing they haven't been confirmed, but there will be several more things from RetroGames. It's exciting to see that games of yesteryear have a way of being commercially available thanks to these mini console releases. So as we can see here, as we look at the unit, it is a perfect recreation, miniaturized, of the Atari 400. Now obviously here it just says the 400 because that's what RetroGames do. They make it the A500, the C64, and so on and so forth. Now obviously we've got controller ports at the front here. These are USB ports specifically. At the back here we've got a power button, USB Type-C for power, HDMI, and then another USB port. So this is perfect if you want to be able to like plug in a memory stick so you can add on extra games. This is the memory stick I've been using, and it is the same one that I got with my A500 Mini. Look at that, it's a miniature floppy disk. Now you can then also plug in the joystick You can plug in a keyboard, you can plug in a mouse and a gamepad, so it's got plenty of ports to be able to put lots of different things in this all at once, which is awesome. Now if we take a look here, we'll see that it does have a keyboard, but this is purely cosmetic. So I think this could have been a real keyboard, so if you were using it like a BlackBerry back in the day, if you had one of those phones. Now obviously this doesn't open here. I never had the Atari 400 originally, but I did have an Atari 800, so even though this isn't exactly the same, it does bring back a lot of nostalgia for me. So fantastic stuff. Look at that, it's got a little Atari button as well. The Mini is a very compact system, smaller than the C64 and A500 minis, but squarer and thicker. As with the other minis, the keyboard is cosmetic only, so you can't use it. You can plug in up to 5 USB devices, so that will allow you to have a USB control stick, a keyboard, a mouse, and like a joystick, you know, lots of different things if you wanted. Now before we get into all of the built-in games, I should say, I want to talk about the most exciting feature of the console, and that is the ability to expand the library and add your own games. Now the process couldn't be any simpler, and all you have to do is add the files of the games onto a memory stick. It has to be formatted, I think, to FAT32 is the term, and then plug into one of the many USB ports of the Atari 400 Mini. Now I use my same USB stick that was set up for my A500 Mini because I still had a ton of space on it, and I added a bunch of Atari 5200 and Atari 800 games, and mostly they seem to work an absolute treat. Now once you plug it in, you'll get an option pop up on the carousel for a USB stick. You won't see this if it isn't inserted, but as soon as you put it in, it will be added to the carousel somewhere in the middle there, and you won't be able to get all of the games listed with graphics and information like you do on the carousel, but you'll just have a list of games. Now this is typical unless some tinkering is done to add artwork and write-ups, but since the 400 Mini is just released, it's too early for this to have happened, but I don't expect it will take long before someone has jailbroken the carousel to be able to add an infinite number of games onto it. Now the game menu, whilst I'm talking about it, is very much like the one from the A500 Mini, and is a nice, clean and clear way to display the list of games with a little bit of information that come built into the console. Now, just like the previous release from RetroGames, this can play a range of different systems. The C64 Mini and C64 Maxi could also play VIC-20 games, and the A500 Mini was much more than just an Amiga 500, and it could play games originally made for the Amiga 500, 1200, 600, Amiga CD32, and potentially even more. In the case of the Atari 400 Mini, I should just call it the 400 Mini, it can also play games from the Atari 800, Atari 800 XL, the 130XE, and the Atari 5200 console. The bad news is this isn't quite the absolute all-in-one Atari device that can also play the libraries from the Atari 2600 and 7800, which would be easy to expect as these are consoles that are usually playable on pretty much any mini Atari that gets released. Of course, the 5200 was a console, and although it's perhaps the least loved of all of Atari's consoles due to its weird analog stick, compatibility with the games from it will allow you to access many of the same games that had versions on the 2600 and the 7800, at least the Atari ones, things like Asteroids and Breakout and so on and so forth like that. Now, perhaps they're not as good as the 7800 versions or as iconic as the 2600 versions, but it's still good to be able to get things running on there like Donkey Kong and Pac-Man. It's also worth noting that this won't give you access to play Atari ST home computer games. My suspicion is that it's only a matter of time until we get an Atari ST Mini from RetroGames, and who knows, maybe an update to this system will allow those games to be compatible in the future. But for now, you'll just have to enjoy the older Atari home computer games. But if you wanted all the different Atari systems to be able to play on one device, you could have already picked up the Atari Gamestation Pro or an Atari Flashback, which will easily let you play games from the 2600 and sometimes the 7200 and other systems. Now, if you want to see my in-depth guide on how to play Atari games these days, you should check out my recent video that covered pretty much every way to play Atari games. Of course, that was made before the 400 Mini released, so I may need to update that in the future. If you're after playing Atari games for the likes of the Lynx or Jaguar, well, you'll probably need to wait a while, but once again, my spidey sense tells me that these projects may be in the works right now. Coming back to the idea of game preservation, the 400 Mini is great and follows on from the likes of the A500 Mini and Gamestation Pro as commercial products that embrace the idea of you being able to easily add your own games. As for the built-in games, there are a good mix of games in there. Some of them are to be expected for an Atari release like Asteroid, Centipede, Millipede, Crystal Castles and such like, and some it doesn't surprise me to see on a mini console released by RetroGames like Boulder Dash and Lee, as they've recently cropped up on other minis like the C64 Mini and the Evercade C64 collections. And I think some of the same people who are involved in licensing those games are involved in RetroGames. This is a good mix of games, and whilst I'll never tire of the likes of Berzerk, Super Breakout and Crystal Castles, it's maybe the 5th time I've played versions of these games across the Atari VCS, the Atari 50 collection, Gamestation Pro, 2600 Plus in recent times, and so it does make me want to see something new. Now obviously these are different versions if they came from the 400 or 800, but they're still pretty much the same games. This said, there are a bunch of games that I've never played before built in, and I have enjoyed dipping my toes into them, and who knows, within time I may grow to love them as much as some of the ones that I know really well. A game like Flip and Flop hasn't quite won me over yet, but I think I need some more time with it. Same with Henry's House, it may be okay, but it's one of those less fun, old school platformers where half the time you're getting killed by one pixel touching something it shouldn't, and then the rest of the time you're just trying to work out what is okay to touch or not. Yoomp, or Yomp, or Jump, Yump, I don't know how it's pronounced, I'll just read it as Yoomp. It's a really cool game. It's a game that was only created in 2007, which is really new for a game for this platform, and it is a 3D platformer of sorts that gives me the vibes of Sonic the Hedgehog's bonus stage from both Sonic 2 and Sonic 3 for various reasons. So unlike Sonic 3 where you're running around the outside of a sphere, in Yoomp you're running on the inside of a cylinder, and it's kind of like the tunnels from the bonus stages of Sonic 2 where you can run all the way around them. So in this you play as a sphere who bounces along the inside of the cylinder and must dodge gaps to get to the end of the stage. It's a great game that shows that inventive ideas can come long after a system has had its main years on the market. And loads of the games on here are enjoyable. Like if you haven't played Crystal Castles before, it's kind of an isometric 3D platformer where you run around and have to collect all of the things, a little bit like on Pac-Man collecting all of the dots whilst avoiding enemies, but it feels 3D, and it's one of the games that I've really enjoyed since I've got into playing all of the classic Atari games. Super Breakout, of course, is a version of Breakout where you have to break all of the bricks at the top of the stage whilst playing kind of like Pong / squash, where you're just bouncing things back and forth but not against an opponent. And there's loads of good games on here. Lee, of course, is the Bruce Lee game, and you have to run around and like fly and kick your way into loads of bad guys whilst collecting stuff. And there's games on here like Berzerk. Now I recently reviewed Berzerk for the Atari 2600 Plus, and I was pleased to see the unique version on this has more speech samples and just generally plays slightly different. It definitely feels like you're getting a different version of the game rather than just the same games over and over again. Same with Asteroids. Playing this, it was just as I remembered from when I had my Atari 800 when I grew up. I won't review all of the 25 games that are built into this on this review. I can save those for a later review because ultimately you can have an infinite amount of games that are available on this one device. Now, I do think if you just had the games that are built into the console, it would still be a respectable list, but because it is so easy to add many extra games to it, it makes it instantly worth the price. Now, it is worth noting that the A500 Mini and C64 Mini have often seen sales online, and I'd expect this to go on sale in the future as well. But as a warning, eventually those became harder to find, and I literally got the last C64 Maxi available on Amazon. And I found it impossible to get the VIC-20. So I don't think this is something you should sleep on getting for too long. The ability to use save states is great if you want to start from later levels in games like Crystal Castles or Boulder Dash, or just want to give yourself a boost to get an insanely high score in the likes of Asteroids. But how you play the games is something you will have a few choices over. The new version of the classic Atari joystick is neat, the CX-Stick as they're calling it, but it may take a little getting used to. If you've not used one of the classic Atari joysticks before, I expect many will find the retro style Atari stick to be quite stiff. But let's take a little bit more of a look at some of the controllers that you can use on this. So here we can see I have two controllers, and one of them is the CX controller for the Atari 400, the CX-Stick I should say, and one of them is the controller that came with the Atari 2600 Plus. Now this is the one from the Atari 2600 Plus, and this is the CX-Stick. I had to actually look at them to be able to tell them apart. But there are a few other ways to be able to tell them apart. Namely, on the CX-Stick, they have added this button down here. I don't know if you can even see it. It's a little button right down there. So you can press like another fire button as you're playing here, rather than having to play like that. I think it's a good idea, but to be honest, it would have been nice if it was down here so that you could have like played it so that you don't, like here I have to use my right hand for the fire button anyway. Maybe I don't have to do that, but that's orientated to up, so yeah, I think I do. So this being down there doesn't actually change that I'm using my right hand to move the stick. So maybe if it had been down here, it would have changed so that you could have played it left-handed with the stick and then right-handed with the trigger button or a fire button. We've got two extra little menu buttons here, and then the really clever stuff is that there is a button on the word top, and then on the like down, left and right buttons directions, there are extra buttons as well. So that is a button, that is a button, that is a button, and that is a button. Truthfully, I do catch these a little bit as I'm playing, just because as I'm trying to mash something here, I'm leaning and I'm like tapping all of the buttons actually. But I think it's something I'll get used to, and it does make it useful, except for you can accidentally like exit a game, or like, especially with Atari stuff, you can press something that kind of resets a game, which isn't ideal. But I am very impressed with it. But that being said, even on the originals, like, oh, actually, does this feel a bit different? And let's feel this one. Yeah, this is definitely clicky. This is a clicky joystick, whereas on the 2600 Plus, it's very rubbery feeling. So there are some differences there, but like visually they look basically the same. Like if I go like this, ooh, which one's which? Which one's which? Do you know? This one's the CX-Stick. How about that? Now, if you don't want to use the CX-Stick, there are a load of other options for controllers that you can use. I've got a bunch of them here. I'll talk you through them. Now, let's see. First of all, if you want to keep things Atari, the Atari VCS gamepad works perfectly, and this is really good. You can use the control stick or the D-pad to be able to control the menus and characters and stuff. That's really good. If you have an Atari Gamestation Pro, this works pretty well. It definitely is an improvement to play games with this stick, in my opinion, but I'm not sure if this has got quite enough buttons for all of the menus, that when you're just like setting up a game, you'll have to connect it via the USB Type-C port as well. I don't think you can use it wirelessly, but I didn't try, to be honest. Also, I tried my Nintendo Switch controller, and it didn't work, not a lick. I also tried my Nintendo Switch N64 controller, and that didn't work either. Same problem, I'm afraid, with both my Xbox One and Xbox Series X controllers. They didn't work, but the good news is my PS4 controller and my PS5 controller both worked a treat. My preferred way to play it, though, if I just get it from back here, is... oops, here we go. My preferred way to play it is either with this controller, which is from the A500 Mini, and this has all of the buttons, the menu button, the start button, or the home button I should say, so everything makes sense for where the buttons, the layout of the buttons is, so you know what they will do in terms of playing stuff on the 400 Mini. Or you could use an Evercade VS controller, and this worked really well as well. In fact, I preferred the D-pad on this, not that I think this is the best controller in the world, but just in terms of that retro feel, this really does work very well. So if you're a retro gamer and you have an Evercade VS, this is a good option. I also tried a few others, including my PC Engine and Sega Mega Drive Mini 2 controllers. So PC Engine Mini, Sega Mega Drive 2 Mini controllers. They worked with varying results. Like, I could use the D-pad on the PC Engine controller, but there wasn't enough buttons. And on the Mega Drive controller, up and down worked, but left and right didn't. Really bizarre stuff. Google Stadia controller worked well to control the menus, but actually when it came to playing the games, yeah, they didn't work at all. So there's a bunch of different controllers out there that work. Some have better results than others. Now, if you want to keep things Atari, like I was saying earlier, you could use the Atari Classic controller, and this worked well, except for once again, it doesn't have quite enough buttons as the A400 Mini does. So you probably need to set up the game using a different controller, but then you can play with this. Paddle, though, didn't work for me, and also the paddle on the Gamestation Pro controller didn't work. I don't know if they could do a future update to enable compatibility with these paddles. That would be awesome, considering these are official Atari products. The 400 Mini is an official Atari product. Make it so. So we'll see what happens there in the future. So yeah, just to go over some of that again, you can use controllers that were made for the A500 and C64 minis, and they work perfectly fine. PS4, PS5 controllers both worked great. Switch Pro and Switch N64 controllers didn't work, nor did the Xbox One or the Xbox Series S/Series X controllers. I also found that the Google Stadia controller works on the menus, but not for the games, and I had a good time using the Atari VCS Modern and Classic controllers. But again, if you use something like the Atari Classic controller or the Atari Gamestation Pro controller, they don't have enough buttons on there to be able to do absolutely everything. But generally speaking, if you're just in the game and you just need to use a control stick and a fire button, they should work absolutely fine. My favourite controller was probably the Evercade VS pad, as it seemed to have enough buttons for everything and felt good and designed well to play classic style games. So the big question, as always, is should you get this mini console? If you have nostalgia for the 8-bit Atari computers, then it's a definite yes. If you are interested in discovering some of this era of games, which is mostly lost to time these days, then the answer should also be yes. Now, if you're not interested in the built-in games or uninterested in increasing the library yourself, this may be a pass for you. But if you are interested in mini consoles as an idea and retro gaming as a theme, this is a must-buy to fill in a big gap of the early days of home video gaming from home computers. So yes, that is going to wrap things up for this review of the 400 Mini. I think it's absolutely awesome if you like old school Atari games, and this allows you to not only have the 400 Mini, but that seems to show there the 5200. I thought it was a 7800 for a second. It shows there that you've got the 130 XE, kind of looks like an Atari ST, but I tried Atari ST ROMs on it and it didn't work. Maybe compatibility will be added in the future, but I think they're holding it back so they can do an Atari ST Mini probably this time next year. So that's going to wrap things up here. As I said, it's really good that you can add your own games. It's got a fun library of games on it. It looks really cool just if you want it as a display piece. Why would you just have this and not actually play it though? So until next time, if you haven't done so already, I would appreciate if you would smash that subscribe button here on the Geek Battle Gaming YouTube channel. And as always, if you want to read the written article version of today's discussion, go over to www.xstreamed.tv/gaming. Oh, the edge of that is clipped off there, but don't worry about that. And with that, until next time, stay safe, always stay extremed, and ciao for now. Boom! And we're off the air.